Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Netanyahu eyes full Gaza takeover as outrage mounts over starving hostages and a war critics call pure deception. Plus, a new UK-France deal could see Channel migrants sent back under a strict one-in, one-out plan. And just 3 days from Trump's Russian sanctions deadline, the Kremlin brushes off his tariff threats as Putin pushes ahead in Ukraine. Israeli media says Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has decided to fully occupy Gaza and is calling on his security cabinet to convene for approval. Critics at home are accusing him of dragging out the war for personal survival, with former Prime Minister Ehud Barak calling it a war of deception. Meanwhile, aid groups warn conditions in Gaza are dire and families of captives are slamming Netanyahu for rejecting a potential ceasefire deal. For more on this, I'm joined by former Palestinian Minister Dr. Ghassan Khatib. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. Israel always said its aim is to destroy Hamas and remove them from power. Is full occupation of the Strip the only option for Israel to guarantee its security and its safety?
Well, I thought that Gaza has been already under Israeli military control for a while, isn't it? In fact, Israel militarily is occupying most of Gaza. Probably they are intending to complete this occupation and control and make it permanent. And I expect that this is what they are planning to do, specifically because they don't have an alternative and because they have a political crisis in Israel. They failed in achieving their declared objectives, and therefore they are intending to double the pressure on Gaza, hoping that this might solve their problems not only in Gaza, but also within the Israeli political system that is facing a lot of growing content and opposition in Israel. I also believe that Israel is doomed in this regard because any retreat or withdrawal from Gaza will bring back the situations in Gaza into the October 7th situation, which is something Israel cannot afford to do. So Israel is in front of two options. Either they continue and complete their control, i.e. occupation over Gaza, or otherwise things will go back into pre-7 of October situations, and this is something Israel cannot afford.
Doctor, in a letter to President Trump, 600 retired Israeli security officials said it is our professional judgment that Hamas no longer poses a strategic threat to Israel. Do you believe that this statement is accurate, or is there growing ideology, Hamas ideology, when we look at Gaza and Israel's war with Gaza?
Hamas is not the real problem for Israel in Gaza. It is the Israeli occupation that is bringing about all kind of resistance to that occupation. This time it's called Hamas. Tomorrow it might be called something else. Yesterday it was called another thing. So this is only a way to deceive the public opinion. The essence of the problem is the continued Israeli occupation to the West Bank and Gaza. And as long as this occupation continues, there will be this form of the resistance or that. So without looking into the political reasons of this conflict, there can be no security solution to it.
It's clear that there are deep divisions inside Israel and the country's military leadership who don't think full occupation of Gaza or Palestine is a good idea. What will this mean for Benjamin Netanyahu's position in power? You already mentioned it to me at the beginning of the interview, that there is a form of fragility as he tries to hang on to the position of Prime Minister within Israel.
That's why I said from the beginning that there is a serious political crisis in Israel. Netanyahu and his right-wing coalition took their time in order to fulfill their declared obligations and failed. And that's why there has been a growing opposition in Israel, a growing protests in Israel against this government. And therefore, Netanyahu is trying to deal with his internal crisis by doubling the pressure on Gaza. And I think that he will fail because he is missing the point. The point is the occupation. And without addressing this root cause of the conflict, he will continue jumping from one crisis to the other.
And I just want to speak to you a little bit about why this war started between Israel and Hamas. It was on October the 7th, and we do know that Hamas entered places within Israel and took hostages and also killed Israeli civilians. And this was really the epicenter of what happened. Families of hostages are still desperate to bring their loved ones home. We saw those images of emaciated hostages being held by Hamas in tunnels. As a former Palestinian minister, what do you think needs to happen? Do Hamas need to give back the hostages? Do they need to disarm? What is the answer to this?
Hamas needs to give back the hostages, and Israel needs to release the Palestinian prisoners, and Israel needs to end its occupation and engage in a political process that will fulfill the basic and legitimate rights of the Palestinians, because this is the only way to guarantee a satisfactory and peaceful end of this episode of the historical conflict between the Israeli occupying power and the occupied Palestinian people.
And I just want to talk to you a little bit about the situation within Gaza. And we're just seeing those horrendous images come out of people desperate for aid, people losing their lives when they go to aid sites to try and get some sort of food to support their family. So little is being done. And what needs to be done? What needs to change here to support and help those people?
What needs to be done is more serious and more bold intervention on behalf of the international community. These new growing criticisms to the Israeli approach to Gaza crisis is promising a little bit, but it's too late and too little. The only way to move things into the right direction is serious pressure from the big brothers of Israel, European countries and the United States, to convince Israel that the use of force and the violation of the basic human rights of the Palestinians in Gaza is not going to bring them nearer to peace and security, put aside the release of their hostages. The way to achieve the declared Israeli objectives of peace and security and release of hostages is to respect the basic rights of the Palestinians is to end this genocide process that has been going on for 2 years and try to engage in a political process that can promise the end of the Israeli illegal occupation, because this is the shortcut to achieving the declared Israeli objectives of peace and security.
Dr. Ghassan Khatib, thank you so much for joining us. For more on this, I'm joined from Berlin by Ruby Hen, father of an Israeli hostage. Ruby, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Your son Itay was a 19-year-old American serving with Israeli forces on the Gaza border when he went missing on October the 7th. It's now been 669 days since you last saw him. Can you share what those days have been like for you, and how have you been coping?
Well, first, thanks for having me. We are here in Berlin because Itay is also a German citizen. The feeling of myself and my wife, it feels like we have been beamed up to a suspended alternative universe where we see and feel things differently and are not part of the normal course of daily activities, as all of our time is dedicated to bringing our son back home.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is to propose the full reoccupation of Gaza when he meets his security cabinet at some point today. As a hostage family member, will this new plan be the best way to bring back your loved ones and the remaining hostages who are still being held inside of Gaza?
So, we are family members. Some people would even say that we are collateral damage of a bigger issue. I listened to the esteemed doctor previously, and we all understand that there are human rights also for the hostages. But just to say, we are all children of God. We all walk this planet together, and I don't think that there should be competition on pain. We are all suffering, including the Palestinian people in Gaza that have been used as human shields from a terrorist organization that are using them and see benefit even by seeing the suffering and the starvation. Because there is food in Gaza. It just doesn't get to who it needs to get to. And we have to say that we are a bit surprised, at least my family. We met Mr. Steve Witkoff on Saturday that shared with us that his plan is based on two components: ceasefire and getting all the hostages out in one shot. And yesterday we had the Prime Minister saying what his plan is. So I have to say it is a bit confusing, because we understood that the United States and Israel are on the same page. So we are also waiting to understand if the Prime Minister is just using the media, or if there's substance behind those statements.
And your meeting with Steve Witkoff that you said that you had, how supportive has Steve Witkoff and the US Republican Party been for you during this, as you say, collateral damage that you've had to deal with?
So I have to say, we as US citizens have always kept this a bipartisan issue and never wanted to get into politics. With the previous administration, we had a very unique relationship where we also met Mr. Jake Sullivan, former National Security Advisor, more than 20 times. And when this administration changed, we also were able to build a very positive relationship with them. I think Mr. Steve Witkoff on Saturday spending almost 3 hours of his time is, we need to admire the fact that he did that, and he answered almost all the questions that the families had. And you feel that he feels a part of our family, as he also lost a child in his past. And we see the dedication from the President of the United States to Mr. Steve Witkoff that spends a lot of time on this. and having the support of the United States to put an end to this. But I do agree with the esteemed doctor, and I also believe that we need to see the international community intervene here, as it has taken 22 months, and it does not seem that we have the horizon for the last hostage coming out, as well as the humanitarian aid and the rehabilitation of Gaza. And I would call the international community, both in the EU and the United States, to be more involved, bring the parties together to a summit that basically says nobody leaves until we have a deal done and we end this conflict that has been going on for too long.
And as you said to me earlier, Steve Witkoff had a very different conversation about their future plan when it comes to getting the hostages out and when it comes to Gaza. I just want to know what your message is right now to hostage families, people of loved ones, and the US and Israeli government about what should happen next and what you hope the future will hold.
So we have 50 hostages, male and female, that have been in this fight and this journey for too long. And we just need to find a way to end this, the suffering of the people, of the hostages, as well as the people that are there in Gaza. That I also believe, there's hunger in Gaza. I don't think anyone could dispute that. But what we do know is that also the hostages have been dealt very inhumane. The International Red Cross have not been provided any access to the hostages, not provide any type of medical attention. I have no acknowledgement from Hamas to this day about the fact that is he in their possession, and B, what his physical status is. And I hope that you agree with me, and I'm sure all the viewers would say that is the lowest type of psychological terrorism that any parent can endure. And that should be unacceptable by the international community. And the fact that Hamas, are able to get by with that, I think is unacceptable. And I would just finish by saying that the Palestinian Authority legally is the representative of all the Palestinian people, including Hamas. So I would also argue and say that also the Palestinian Authority has that responsibility as well to take the.
Ruby Shen, I am sorry, we appear to have lost your line there, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us. That was Ruby Shen. I'm not sure if you can hear me. I do apologize. We did lose connection, but once again, thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. A new one-in, one-out scheme will let the UK send some new Channel arrivals back to France while taking in the same numbers of vetted asylum seekers with ties to Britain. Only new arrivals will be eligible, and those caught crossing will be detained immediately. Reports suggest just 50 people a week may be returned under the plan. So far this year, more than 25,000 people have crossed, nearly 50% more than this time last year. For more on this, I'm joined by our Paris correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, thank you so much for joining me. First of all, how exactly will the one-in, one-out scheme work in practice, as there is a lot of concern and criticism this actually won't make any meaningful difference to the number of migrants crossing the Channel?
Yeah, that's certainly what the leader of the British Conservative Party has been saying, that it won't work in practice, won't make any meaningful impact on the issue. But we have heard also from the British Interior Minister today. She's been speaking, Yvette Cooper, saying that we don't have a fixed final number on how many people will be sent back to France and how many people will be accepted into the UK immigration system. saying that she doesn't want to give operational information to criminal gangs. But certainly the way it will work is that if there is a legal asylum seeker here in France who passes UK eligibility checks and security checks, has a legal right to travel to the UK and hasn't previously attempted one of the most dangerous maritime crossings in the world, attempts to traverse the English Channel, then they might be allowed into the UK to continue to process that claim. That's the one in. And then the one out would be that any undocumented migrants who make the crossing of the Channel, successfully reach British shores, would then be sent back to France, and France would accept those people back here. The situation is deadly. There have been at least 18 deaths already this year, more than 200 since 2018, of people trying to cross the Channel in what are often very poorly equipped dinghies with engines or engines that don't work, overcrowded, not enough life jackets in some of the busiest shipping routes in the world, very cold water as well, very strong currents, but people are determined to try to leave northern France and reach the southern UK.
So, Ross, I know the UK and France are trialling this one-in, one-out scheme at the moment. It seems to be the first time they've ever done it. How successful is this partnership between the UK and France, and what are the finances involved?
Well, they've been hailing this new step forward, saying that this was a change in the policy from the previous government under the former British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who had that infamous slogan to try to, quote, stop the boats. Well, Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, who's just passed 1 year in office since being elected in 2024, has come up with this new plan devised in concert with the French President, Emmanuel Macron. It was discussed during President Macron's recent state visit to Britain, and then the text was signed last week by the two Interior Ministers, Yvette Cooper for the UK side and Bruno Retailleau here in France, and they do believe that it can be a way of stopping the illegal activity of the human trafficking gangs working in and around northern France and also throughout the rest of Europe, the gangs that procure boats, the vans to carry the boats, that try to have as many people as possible for as high a price as possible on these overloaded dinghies. Both sides would like to stop that. There has been an increased enforcement. The UK is paying hundreds of millions of pounds to France for France to step up and increase police patrols on the beaches in and around the Channel coasts of that part of France, not far from the port city of Calais. There are expectations this will make a difference. That's certainly what the UK and France government hopes, but we will have to see in practice as this policy is implemented if it can make any indentation on the numbers.
And Ross, just before I let you go, another story. The EU has agreed to suspend its countermeasures against the US for 6 months. What's behind the timing of this move, and how solid is the broader trade agreement between Brussels and Washington, as we do know about Donald Trump and his tariff plans?
Well, Leigh-Ann, this has been a move that was expected, but there is, as so far, no inked joint statement from Washington and Brussels firming up that trade agreement framework that was agreed. The EU has now said that they will freeze, for the moment, the $107 billion worth of retaliatory tariffs they wanted to impose on Washington if Washington went ahead with the bigger rate of 30% import tax on EU companies exporting into the United States. They've gone with 15%, and we heard a little bit earlier on from the European Union Commission spokesman, Olaf Gill, in a press conference on Tuesday. He said that it was an extremely volatile and unpredictable contemporary economic environment. We would have preferred 0% tariffs on both sides, but we have to look at the alternatives, which were escalation and higher tariffs on both partners, saying that it is not a result that the EU is celebrating, but it's better than it could have been. So we do have that baseline tariff rate, 15% on EU goods, going to the United States, but the EU is still hoping for some tariff exemptions on certain products. Leigh-Ann?
Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you so much for joining us. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. A 21-year-old man has been charged with the murder of a Saudi student in Cambridge in what police described as an unprovoked stabbing. The victim, 20-year-old Mohammed Al-Ghamizm, was on a 10-week study placement in the city when he was attacked while walking to his dormitory. A second man, aged 50, has been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Authorities in Mexico's Guanajuato state say 32 bodies have been recovered from secret graves, with nearly half already identified. The region has seen relentless cartel violence as the Jalisco New Generation cartel fights the local Santa Rosa de Lima gang. Over 1,500 killings have been recorded in the state this year alone. Now, House Republicans have subpoenaed Bill and Hillary Clinton, along with former FBI and DOJ officials, over how the government handled the Jeffrey Epstein case. The Oversight Committee wants testimony and records tied to Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. It comes after a DOJ memo denied any Epstein client list and confirmed his death was a suicide. Now, Japan is gearing up to mark 80 years since the US used the atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. It was the first time that a nuclear weapon was used against a civilian population. Those marking the anniversary of the tragedy are warning, do not forget the lessons of the past. Camille Nedelec has the story.
Death dealt out on an industrial scale. That's the heavy legacy of Hiroshima.
It's horrible to see all those people were bombed and hear all those stories, and we have to do something about it. But if we remain silent, it might happen again.
Those for whom the bomb is still just within living memory queued up to pay their respects at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, where final preparations were underway to mark 80 years since the US used its atomic weapon on a civilian population in a densely populated area. Around 140,000 people died as a result. For people here, that day in 1945 was not just a dark chapter in humanity's past, it's a warning.
It feels more and more like history is repeating itself. Terrible things are happening in Europe. It looks like it could escalate. I've got grandchildren, and I want peace so that they can live their lives happily.
But while the country is gearing up for its day of commemorations, Rebun Kayo has been carrying out his own years-long remembrance. Around 10,000 victims were brought to Ninoshima, an island a few kilometers away from where the bomb was dropped. Cremations could not keep up with the number of dead. They were buried in mass graves.
I was told there were transport ships. Boats piled with bodies came to the shore here. Then the soldiers dug a hole and buried them here, one after the other.
Kayo visits several times a year, painstakingly going through the dirt, picking out fragments of bone.
The bones in here, they haven't been treated humanely for 80 years. It'll be 80 years this year. They've been buried in the earth like they're objects. Normally when humans die, we're buried respectfully somewhere, like at a temple or a church.
He says his work is a way of ensuring victims of the blast are not forgotten. Victims like Harune Kitano's mother and grandfather. She was a little girl at the time and still remembers the moment of the explosion.
First, there was a flash of light, then a little after that was the boom. Everyone said, "It's an air raid, it's an air raid," and went into the school building.
Japan is still the only country in the world to have suffered an atomic attack and has gone on to lead global efforts on disarmament and non-proliferation in the hopes of ensuring that never again truly does mean never. Camille Nedelec, Al Arabiya English.
There's just 3 days to go until President Donald Trump's Russian sanctions ultimatum, imposing 100% tariffs on countries who buy their oil. Earlier today, the US president told CNBC he believed energy prices would go down if Putin stopped killing people. However, sources close to the Kremlin say Trump's threat will not shake the Russian president's goal of capturing 4 regions of Ukraine. For more on this, I'm joined by Donald Jensen, Professor of Russian Foreign Policy at Johns Hopkins University and former diplomat at the US Embassy, Moscow. Thank you so much for joining me on the show again. It's great to have you back. Trump says lower oil prices would force Vladimir Putin to stop the war, and he's planning tariffs on countries like India to push those prices down. How realistic is it that oil prices alone could really change Putin's actions in Ukraine?
Well, my personal view is not very realistic at all. What we're seeing is a drama, as you know, that's been playing out since the beginning of the year. Will there be negotiations or not? Are the Russians in good faith or acting in good faith or not? And President Trump has been very tough on Putin in the last few weeks, arguing that sanctions would be imposed, indirect sanctions in particular, on countries like China and India. And we have 2 problems here. One is that I don't think the Kremlin is likely to change its behavior based on a rise in the oil prices. And second, President Trump is wants to deal with India and China economic and trade issues. And that means there's going to be let's say, a market break on the kind of action he may want to do otherwise. So it's going to be a very interesting meeting. I don't expect a lot of positive results, and it has this background not only about energy, as you said, but also this remarkable talk about nuclear weapons in the past few days, which I think has caught a lot of observers by surprise.
And let's just touch on those talks about the nuclear weapons, actually. I was just thinking about this, Donald. The Kremlin has used the word emotional after President Trump redeployed 2 nuclear submarines closer to Russia. Is this an accurate description of Donald Trump's reaction to negotiations when things just do not go his way? Does he become emotional?
An excellent question. I think you have to put it in context, which is to say, the Kremlin, I think, from what their delay in commenting and reacting, I think was really surprised by President Trump's comments. And beginning about Sunday, they've taken a particular line, as you mentioned, which I think is very unrealistic and frankly distorted. Accusing him of being emotional, talking about whatever he said is not really a threat to Russia. And third, trying to act like Russia is a constructive member of the international community, which on Ukraine it certainly is not. So we have in this background former President Medvedev talking really tough himself, using the threat of nuclear war as one of his recent remarks. So the Kremlin is trying to have it both ways. The Kremlin has often used nuclear rhetoric. The Kremlin has often used Medvedev as sort of a attack dog to make Putin look more reasonable. So I think we have to put this in the broader context of Russia's, let's call it, information warfare on the eve of these negotiations. So again, it's both more and less than it seems, and I think we should not forget for an instant that the Kremlin is playing hybrid informational operations, propaganda operations in the run-up to the summit later this week.
And let's have a chat about that, because, of course, Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is heading to Russia. Apparently, he should be there midweek. We don't have an exact date yet, Donald. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that he's had a productive conversation with Donald Trump over the phone today. So we're seeing lots of moving plates, of course, ahead of the deadline on Friday. Do you think we're closer to a ceasefire deal than ever before? Or is it just more talks about talks and we won't get anywhere?
Well, we have a problem here, which is that all the sides understand the word negotiations differently. President Zelensky and President Trump very much want constructive, meaningful peace talks. And I think Zelensky and Trump are both on the same side on that. The Kremlin is actually saying, no, wait a minute, we will sit down and talk. And if you see his advisor, Putin's advisor, Peskov's comments, they will do it on the understanding that the so-called preparatory work is completed first. What does that mean? That means that Putin is not budging at all on negotiations or on the issue of sitting down even. Putin wants what he's wanted from the beginning of the war, which is to say the dominance in Ukraine. And he's looking reasonable. He's trying to talk about, well, maybe we'll sit down and talk as a way to make himself and the Russian position more moderate, which it most certainly is not. And I think that realization, that's just my opinion, that realization in the White House, in Washington, has really caused the apparent shift in the White House position on Zelensky and on Moscow in recent weeks. President Trump knows that this is to some extent a propaganda ploy by the Kremlin. He doesn't want to get caught into it. You saw yesterday he talked about these guys in Russia are wily. And both President Zelensky and President Trump want negotiations to go someplace, which is to end the war and get a peaceful settlement. By all accounts, Russia is not interested in that. Russia continues to bombard cruelly Ukrainian civilian targets, hospitals, schools, apartment buildings. And that, more than anything else, suggests that not much will probably happen on Friday. I would remind you that, as well, point out that according to President Trump last Friday, the Russians asked for envoy Witkoff to be the representative of the United States. I think Envoy Witkoff has been criticized, particularly in February, about his lack of experience, perhaps unfairly. And I think the Russians see him as an easier mark, as they say in English, rather than some of the other people in the White House. And so this all looks to me like a setup for the Kremlin to score some propaganda points without anything really happening substantively on the ground.
Donald Jensen, it's always a pleasure to have your insights and analysis. Thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at the top business news now. British energy giant BP says it has made its largest oil and gas discovery in 25 years at a deep water site in Brazil. The development comes as the firm shifts its focus away from renewable energy and back to fossil fuels. BP is conducting tests and will explore building a production hub at the site. Now, for the very first time in nearly 2 years, Aldi is no longer the UK's cheapest supermarket. That title now belongs to rival budget chain Lidl, according to new data from Which. A typical basket of groceries at Lidl came in at 85 pence cheaper than Aldi. Meanwhile, Waitrose is the most expensive if you're going out to get your supermarket shop. A reminder of our top stories. Netanyahu eyes full Gaza takeover as outrage mounts over starving hostages, and a war critics call pure deception. Plus, a new UK-France deal could see Channel migrants sent back under a strict one-in, one-out plan. And just 3 days from Trump's Russian sanctions deadline, the Kremlin brushes off his tariff threats as Putin pushes ahead in Ukraine. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and, of course, follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora is coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.